I never expected to see her there, in my lodge. The wood cracked under her feet. I froze. A Karen is living inside my newly purchased abandoned hunting lodge. You won't believe what happened next. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to tell people about this one. Let me back up and explain how I ended up here, because this story, it's absolutely insane. My name's Jake, and I've spent the last 12 years renovating historic properties. It's my passion, taking these forgotten, crumbling pieces of architecture and bringing them back to life. I specialize in mountain lodges, old ski resorts, anything with character and history. 6 months ago, I was scrolling through auction listings when I found her, the Pinecrest Lodge, built in 1947, sitting on 4 acres of pristine woodland in the White Mountains. The listing said, abandoned, sold as is, significant renovation required. The photos showed broken windows, overgrown grounds, and a structure that was clearly struggling. But I could see past all that. I could see the original stone fireplace, the exposed beam ceiling, and the wraparound porch that probably had million-dollar views. This was exactly what I'd been looking for. The auction was competitive, but I won with a bid of $185,000. For 4 acres and a 200-square-foot lodge, that was a steal, even with renovation costs. The property had been through 3 owners in the last decade, all of whom had apparently started renovations and abandoned them. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too excited to notice. I did my due diligence. Title search came back clean. No liens, no encumbrances, no weird easements. The county records showed the property had been legally vacant since 2018. I hired an inspector who confirmed it was structurally sound, just needed cosmetic work, electrical updates, and a new roof. Everything checked out. Closing day was smooth. I got my keys, filed my paperwork with the county, and started planning my renovation timeline. I was targeting an 8-month project. Gut the interior, update all systems, restore the original details, and turn it into a luxury short-term rental. I'd already lined up contractors, ordered materials, and set up my project management timeline. Then I met Linda. I was at the property on a Tuesday morning taking detailed measurements and photos when I heard a car pull up. I walked outside to see a silver Lexus SUV blocking my driveway. The personalized plate read, Hopres. Out stepped a woman in her early 60s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer athleisure wear, and the kind of oversized sunglasses that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager." "Excuse me," she said, not even introducing herself. "What are you doing on this property?" I smiled, extending my hand. "Hi, I'm Jake. I just purchased this lodge. I'm the new owner." She didn't shake my hand. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "That's impossible. This property is under HOA jurisdiction, and we haven't approved any new owners." I kept my smile, though it was getting harder. "I bought it at a legal auction 3 weeks ago. I have the deed and title in my truck if you'd like to see them." "I don't care what you think you have," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm Linda Hastings, president of the Pinecrest Mountain HOA, and nothing happens in this community without my approval. Did you receive a welcome packet? Did you attend an orientation meeting? Did you submit your renovation plans for architectural review?" This is where I should mention something important about mountain HOAs. Unlike suburban neighborhoods where the HOA might control your fence height and mailbox color, mountain HOAs are supposed to focus on shared amenities, roads, water systems, communal buildings. They typically have minimal control over what you do with your private property, especially properties this size with their own separate access. "Ma'am, I appreciate the introduction, but I've reviewed the HOA bylaws. This property has its own access road and utilities. The HOA governs the main community road maintenance and the shared well system, which I'm happy to pay my dues for. But architectural review doesn't apply to properties over 2 acres with independent access." Her face went red. Actually red, like a cartoon character about to explode. "How dare you tell me what our bylaws say?" I've been president of this HOA for 15 years. I know every single word of our governing documents. You will submit your plans to the Architectural Review Committee, you will pay a $5,000 new owner fee, and you will attend the mandatory orientation, or I will make your life absolutely miserable. Do you understand me? I took a deep breath. First day, and I was already dealing with an HOA Karen. Great. I tell you what, I said, keeping my voice level. Why don't you email me the specific bylaw sections you're referring to, and I'll review them with my real estate attorney. If I'm wrong, I'll happily comply. But based on my reading of the documents, I don't believe those requirements apply to this property. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Listen to me very carefully. The previous 3 owners all thought they could do whatever they wanted. They all learned differently. This community has standards. I protect those standards, and if you think you're going to turn this historic lodge into some party house for drunk tourists, you have another thing coming. Then she got back in her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing there wondering what the hell just happened. You won't believe what happened next. Over the next 2 weeks, I started receiving violations. Not emails, certified letters sent to my home address, each one costing the HOA $8.47 in postage, each one more ridiculous than the last. Violation number 1. Unapproved vehicle parked on property, my work truck, on my own driveway. Violation number 2. Construction debris visible from community road. This was a pile of rotted wood I'd removed from the porch, neatly stacked and covered with a tarp, barely visible from the road a quarter-mile away. Violation number 3. Failure to maintain landscaping to community standards. The property had been abandoned for 7 years. The landscaping was overgrown because nobody had been there to maintain it. That's what happens to abandoned properties. Each violation came with a $500 fine and a threat to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply immediately. I called an emergency meeting with my real estate attorney, Marcus, who'd handled my closing. We sat in his office and went through every single violation letter. "This is harassment," Marcus said flatly. "None of these violations is legitimate. Your property is explicitly exempt from architectural review based on size and independent access. And even if it wasn't, these violations are absurd. You can't fine someone for having a work vehicle at a construction site." "So what do?" I asked. "Document everything. Respond to each violation in writing, explaining why it's invalid. Don't pay the fines. That would constitute acceptance of their authority. And keep doing your work. She's going to escalate, but eventually she'll overstep so badly we can take action." Marcus was right about the escalation. The next week, I arrived at the property to find a bright orange "Stop Work Order" sign zip-tied to my gate. It claimed I was conducting unpermitted construction in violation of HOA regulations and county building codes. It looked official, with the HOA logo and everything. Here's the thing about stop work orders. They're issued by building departments, not HOAs, and I'd already pulled all my permits with the county. I called the building department and they confirmed they'd issued no such order. Linda had made it up. I photographed the fake stop work order, carefully removed it, and kept working. 2 days later, my contractor called me, furious. "Jake, a woman came to the site today and threatened my crew. Said if we continued working, she'd report us to the state licensing board for operating without permits. My guys are spooked. They don't want legal trouble." I drove up to the lodge immediately. When I arrived, Linda was there, standing in my driveway like she owned the place. She'd brought 2 other people with her, a man and woman, both probably in their late 50s, both wearing matching HOA board member polo shirts, like they were at a corporate golf outing. "This work stops now," Linda announced. "You have not complied with a single HOA requirement. Your fines now total $7,500, and until they're paid in full, no construction will take place on this property." "You have no authority to stop my work," I said calmly. "I have all the required county permits. The HOA doesn't govern construction on this property, and your fake stop work order was illegal." She smiled. Actually smiled. "Sue me then. Please take me to court. While you're busy doing that, your contractors won't work, your materials will sit unused, and every day you delay costs you money. I've done this before, Mr. Jake. I always win. The other two board members nodded smugly. This wasn't their first rodeo. They'd perfected this intimidation routine. This is where it gets good. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Linda had said. The previous three owners all thought they could do whatever they wanted. They all learned differently. I went back through the property records, tracking down information on the previous owners. The first one, a couple from Boston, had held the property for only 8 months before selling at a loss. The second owner, a developer, had held it for 11 months. The third owner, a retired couple, had held it for just 6 months. I found a phone number for the retired couple and called them. The wife, Patricia, answered. "Oh God, the Pinecrest Lodge," she said when I explained who I was. "That property was supposed to be our retirement dream. It turned into a nightmare." "Let me guess," I said. "Linda Hastings?" "That woman," Patricia practically spat the word. "She made our lives hell from day one. Fake violations, harassment, and threats against our contractors. We tried to fight it, but our lawyer said it would cost $50,000 in legal fees to take her to court, and we'd be fighting the entire HOA. We just wanted to enjoy our retirement, not wage war. So we sold and took a $60,000 loss. I called the other previous owners. Same story. Linda had systematically harassed every single owner who'd tried to renovate the lodge, driving them away through a war of attrition. She didn't have legal authority, but she had time, determination, and a willingness to lie and intimidate. But here's what she didn't know about me. I don't quit. And I'm really good at research. I spent the next 3 days digging into Linda's HOA presidency. I pulled 15 years of HOA meeting minutes from the county clerk's office. I reviewed every single financial statement. I interviewed current and former community residents. And I found something interesting. The Pinecrest Mountain HOA wasn't supposed to have architectural review authority over large properties at all. That power had been explicitly removed in a 2008 bylaw amendment, voted on by the membership. But Linda had never updated the documents she gave to new residents. She'd been operating on bylaws that were 17 years out of date, enforcing rules that no longer existed. More importantly, I found that Linda had been levying these fake fines for years, collecting money that went into the HOA account, which she controlled as president. She'd collected over $400,000 in questionable fines over the last decade. Some of that money had been used for legitimate HOA expenses, but a lot of it had gone to consulting fees paid to her own property management company. Linda wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a long-term fraud scheme, using fake violations to generate income. But I still wasn't done digging because I wanted to understand why she was so obsessed with my property specifically. Why had she targeted every single owner who'd tried to renovate this particular lodge? Then Marcus, my attorney, found something in the old deed records. Something from 1982. Linda Hastings had owned the Pinecrest Lodge. She and her then-husband had purchased it as a vacation home, held it for 3 years, and sold it in 1985 when they divorced. According to the divorce records, Linda had wanted to keep the property, but her husband had forced the sale. She'd been trying to buy it back ever since, making offers every time it changed hands, every time the new owners had refused to sell. Linda wasn't just harassing lodge owners because of HOA power games. She was doing it to drive them away so she could eventually buy the property back at a distressed price. She was systematically destroying her own community members' investments to reclaim something she'd lost 40 years ago. Now I was angry, really angry. Let me paint you a picture of what happened next, because this is where I stopped playing defense and started playing offense. I hired a private investigator. His name was Tom, a former FBI agent specialized in white-collar crime investigations. I paid him $15,000 to do a complete audit of Linda's HOA activities, every violation she'd issued, every fine she'd collected, every expense she'd approved, every contract she'd signed. Tom worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he had a 200-page report documenting a pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and intimidation spanning over a decade. He found that Linda had issued over 800 violations in 15 years, an average of 1 violation every week. He found shell companies owned by her family members that had received HOA contracts without competitive bidding. He found threats she'd made in writing to residents who questioned her authority. But here's the best part. Tom found that Linda had filed a homestead exemption on the Pinecrest Lodge address in 2019. A homestead exemption is a tax benefit you can only claim on your primary residence, the place where you actually live. That's when everything clicked. The property had been abandoned for 7 years, but Linda had claimed it as her primary residence 4 years ago, which meant she'd been living there, in my building, a building she didn't own. I called Tom immediately. "Can you get surveillance on the property? I need to know if she's there now." He set up cameras on the surrounding road with proper permits. Within 3 days, we had proof. Linda was entering and exiting the Pinecrest Lodge regularly. She had furniture inside. She was living in a property she didn't own, paying no rent, and claiming a homestead tax exemption on it to avoid paying full property taxes on her actual house. Linda had been squatting in the lodge since 2019, and she'd used her HOA position to drive away every owner who'd tried to reclaim their own property. I sat in my office, looking at the surveillance footage, and made a decision. I wasn't just going to win this fight. I was going to make sure Linda never did this to anyone else again. First, I called the county assessor's office and reported the fraudulent homestead exemption. They launched an immediate investigation. Second, I filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office for HOA fraud, including Tom's entire 200-page report. Third, I contacted every single resident Linda had victimized over the years, people who'd paid thousands in fake fines, people who'd abandoned renovation projects, people who'd sold at a loss. I had Tom document all of their stories. Fourth, and this is important, I installed security cameras all around the property, professional grade systems, night vision, motion-activated cloud backup. I wanted footage of everything that happened next. Then I did something Linda would never see coming. I scheduled a renovation walkthrough with the county building inspector for Monday at 9 a.m. I made sure to mention it loudly to my contractors so that Linda could hear about it through the community grapevine. I wanted her to know I was going to be there with an official, but I actually showed up at 6 a.m., 3 hours early. I parked down the road and hiked to the property through the woods. The sun was coming up, casting long shadows through the pine trees. The lodge looked beautiful in the early light, or it would have once I finished the renovation. I approached quietly, and that's when I saw it. Lights on inside. Not flashlights, electric lights. Someone had run extension cords from the old electrical panel I hadn't disconnected yet. I walked around to the side door, the one I'd been meaning to replace, and found it slightly ajar. Someone had installed a new lock, but they'd left it unlocked from the inside. That's when I heard the footsteps above me, the footsteps that started this whole story. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Then I called up the stairs. "Hello, this is Jake Martinez, the property owner. Who's there?" Silence. The footsteps stopped. "I'm calling the police right now," I said loudly. "I'm the legal owner of this property. You're trespassing." I heard scrambling upstairs, rapid movement. Then Linda appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a bathrobe, a pink, fluffy bathrobe, like she'd just gotten out of bed. Her perfect hair was in curlers. She looked like she'd been caught literally sleeping in someone else's house, because she had been. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, like I was the intruder. "I own this building," I said calmly, still recording. "What are you doing here?" "I'm conducting an HOA inspection," she said, but her voice was shaky. "I have every right to inspect properties in our community. At 6 a.m. in your bathrobe, with your personal belongings upstairs?" Her face went through several expressions: anger, panic, calculation. Finally, she settled on indignation. "How dare you?" I'm going to have you arrested for harassment. Linda, I said, and my voice was steel now. I have security footage of you entering this property over 200 times in the last month. I have documentation showing you filed a homestead exemption on this address. I have witnesses who've seen you living here for years. You're not inspecting anything. You're squatting in my building. The color drained from her face. Now, I continued, you're going to pack your belongings, and you're going to leave my property. And if you ever set foot here again, I will prosecute you for trespassing, fraud, and any other charge my attorney can think of. Do you understand? She tried one more time. This is my house. I've lived here since... She caught herself, but it was too late. Since when, Linda? Since before you filed the homestead exemption in 2019? Before you started harassing the legal owners? How many people's lives have you destroyed because you couldn't let go of a house you sold 40 years ago? Tears started running down her face, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. This house was mine. My ex-husband had no right to force me to sell it. Every person who bought it was stealing it from me. They were all wrong. They were all legal owners, I cut her off. And you systematically destroyed their investments and their dreams because of your own obsession. That's not justice, Linda. That's just cruelty. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I'd called them right before I entered the property, and they'd been waiting down the road in case things got violent. They were professional and calm, taking statements from both of us. Linda tried to claim she had permission to be there. She tried to say she was conducting HOA business. She tried to say I was harassing her. The officers listened politely, then asked her to prove she had any legal right to be in the building. She couldn't. They escorted her off the property and informed her she was banned from returning. If she came back, she'd be arrested for trespassing. They also asked if I wanted to press charges immediately. Not yet, I said. I want to let the state investigation run its course first. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I called an emergency HOA meeting. As a property owner and dues-paying member, I had that right. I sent certified letters to every single resident in the community, informing them of serious allegations of fraud and misconduct by their HOA president. I included a summary of Tom's findings and invited everyone to attend the meeting at the community center. 73 out of 92 property owners showed up. The community center was packed. People were angry, confused, and demanding answers. Linda tried to control the meeting, but I'd filed a proper petition for her removal under the HOA bylaws. I had 3 other board members, people she'd appointed and controlled, sitting at the front table looking increasingly nervous. I presented everything: the outdated bylaws she'd been enforcing, the fake violations, the embezzled fees were paid to her family's companies, the homestead exemption fraud, the systematic harassment of property owners, the squatting in my building. I had documentation for everything. Tom had done his job perfectly. Every claim I made, I backed up with official records, witness statements, or photographic evidence. The room erupted. People started shouting stories of their own Linda encounters, fines they'd paid to avoid legal fights, projects they'd abandoned. One couple stood up crying, saying they'd lost their retirement savings fighting Linda's fake violations before finally giving up and selling their dream home at a loss. Linda sat at the front table, her face frozen in a mask of fury. Occasionally, she'd try to interrupt, but the crowd would shout her down. She'd lost them. After 15 years of ruling the HOA like her personal fiefdom, her kingdom had just collapsed. The vote was unanimous. Linda was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The board was dissolved, and a special election was scheduled for new leadership. An independent forensic accountant was hired to audit all HOA finances going back 10 years. And a formal complaint was filed with the state's HOA regulatory board. Linda stood up to leave, and someone in the crowd shouted, "How could you?" She paused at the door, turned around, and for just a moment I saw something different in her face. Not anger, shame maybe, or exhaustion. "That house was supposed to be mine," she said quietly. It was the only place I'd ever been happy. Then she left. Here's where things got legally interesting. The state attorney general's investigation moved quickly. Turns out, when you have 200 pages of documented fraud handed to you on a silver platter, cases move fast. Within 3 months, Linda was charged with HOA fraud, embezzlement, filing false government documents, and criminal trespass. The homestead exemption fraud alone cost her $45,000 in back taxes and penalties. The embezzlement charges covered the over $127,000 she'd funneled to her family's companies through no-bid contracts, and the civil suits started piling up. 17 different property owners filed lawsuits seeking damages for the financial losses they'd suffered from her harassment. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. Linda would plead guilty to reduced charges, pay restitution, and face no jail time if she agreed to permanently resign from any HOA leadership position and complete 500 hours of community service. She refused. She actually refused. She was so convinced she'd been in the right, so certain that the house was supposed to be hers, that she took it to trial. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through the timeline of her harassment, the fake violations, the intimidation tactics, and the squatting. Tom, my investigator, testified about the financial fraud. The previous property owners testified about their losses. The HOA's new president testified about the missing funds they'd discovered. Linda's defense was basically that she'd been protecting the community's property values and enforcing legitimate HOA rules. Her attorney tried to paint me as an outsider trying to destroy a close-knit community with a frivolous lawsuit. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and found her guilty on all counts. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 70s, did not go easy on her during sentencing. "Ms. Hastings," she said, "you were given a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors relied on you to manage their shared resources fairly and honestly. Instead, you used that position to enrich yourself and to pursue a personal vendetta against property owners who had every legal right to their homes. You've caused significant financial and emotional harm to multiple families. Your behavior was calculated, systematic, and showed a disturbing lack of remorse." Linda was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay $340,000 in restitution to the various property owners she'd defrauded. She was also permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. She filed an appeal. It was denied. The civil suits settled quickly after the criminal conviction. Linda's homeowner's insurance actually covered some of the HOA's liability, and the rest came from her personal assets. She had to sell her actual house, the one she really lived in, not the lodge she'd been squatting in, to cover the judgments. The community underwent a massive transformation. The new HOA board was comprised of younger residents who actually understood the bylaws and wanted to operate transparently. They published all meeting minutes online. They created clear guidelines for legitimate violations. They refunded thousands of dollars in bogus fines Linda had collected over the years. And several residents who Linda's harassment had driven away came forward with their own stories. Turns out I wasn't even close to her only victim. One man had abandoned a $200,000 renovation project after Linda threatened him with daily fines. A couple had lost their retirement home after Linda's harassment caused them so much stress that the wife had a heart attack. The full scope of damage she'd caused was staggering. As for my lodge, I finished the renovation in exactly 8 months, just like I'd planned. The work was beautiful. I restored every original detail while modernizing all the systems. The stone fireplace was the centerpiece of the great room. The exposed beams glowed warm in the evening light. The wraparound porch had those million-dollar views I'd imagined. I threw a massive open house when it was finished, inviting the entire HOA community. Over 100 people showed up. They brought food, drinks, and stories. People who'd suffered under Linda's reign celebrated in the building she'd obsessed over for 40 years. There was something poetic about that. The lodge became exactly what I'd envisioned. a luxury short-term rental that brought visitors to the community and generated income for local businesses. I partnered with the HOA to use a percentage of profits for community improvements. We built a new playground, repaved the roads, and upgraded the shared well system. I even hired one of Linda's former victims, the retired couple who'd lost $60,000, to manage the property. They were thrilled to have a connection to the mountain community they'd been driven away from. 6 months after the renovation was complete, I was at the lodge doing some maintenance when a car pulled up. My stomach dropped when I saw it was a silver Lexus SUV. But then I realized the license plate was different. A woman in her 30s got out. She looked nervous. "Are you Jake?" she asked. "That's me," I said cautiously. "I'm Sarah, Linda Hastings' daughter." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to come apologize for what my mother did to you and to thank you." That caught me off guard. "Thank me? My mother has been obsessed with this property my entire life," Sarah said. "Every vacation, every holiday, she'd drive past it and talk about how it was stolen from her, how she deserved to have it back. It consumed her. It destroyed her relationship with my father, with me, with everyone. We all tried to get her help, but she wouldn't listen." She looked up at the lodge. "When she got arrested, I was devastated. But then I saw what you'd uncovered, all the people she'd hurt, all the damage she'd caused. I realized she needed to face consequences, and I realized that she'd probably never be able to move forward as long as this property existed as a symbol of what she'd lost." "I'm sorry you had to go through that," I said. "That couldn't have been easy." "She's getting treatment now," Sarah continued. "In prison, she finally started seeing a therapist. They diagnosed her with something called pathological hoarding of grievances. She couldn't let go of any perceived wrong, and it festered into this need for revenge and control. Losing this property in her divorce was the original wound, and she spent 40 years making everyone else bleed for it." We talked for a while longer. Sarah told me her mother was starting to take responsibility for her actions, though it was a slow process. She was working on apologies to the people she'd hurt. She'd probably never fully recover from her obsession, but at least now she was facing it. After Sarah left, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset over the mountains. The lodge was beautiful, peaceful, everything I'd wanted it to be. And I thought about what Marcus, my attorney, had told me all those months ago. She's going to escalate, but eventually she'll overstep so badly we can take action. He'd been right. Linda's need to control everything is what ultimately destroyed her. If she'd just left me alone, if she'd accepted that the lodge belonged to someone else now, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president. She'd still have her house, her reputation, her freedom. But she couldn't let it go, and that refusal to release her grip on something that was never really hers to begin with cost her everything. There's a lesson in that. Not just about HOAs or property disputes, but about life. We all have things we've lost. Relationships, opportunities, versions of our lives we thought we'd have. And yes, some of those losses are genuinely unfair. Life isn't always just. But there's a difference between grieving something you've lost and letting that loss consume you to the point where you start hurting other people. There's a difference between holding boundaries and building walls made of rage. There's a difference between protecting what's yours and trying to steal what belongs to others. Linda couldn't see that difference. She'd convinced herself that her pain justified her actions, that her sense of injustice gave her the right to terrorize innocent people. She'd built an entire life around a wound that happened 4 decades ago. And in the end, she didn't even get what she wanted. All that scheming, all that harassment, all those destroyed lives. And she still lost the house. Not because someone stole it from her, but because she became someone whom nobody wanted to trust with anything. I finished renovating the Pinecrest Lodge. Linda went to prison. The community healed. And life moved forward, like it always does. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. I've got more renovation nightmares and HOA horror stories coming your way. But here's my question for you. What boundary do you need to protect? What line has someone crossed that you've been too patient about? What injustice have you been tolerating because confrontation feels harder than compliance? Because here's what I learned from this whole experience. Standing up to bullies is exhausting. It's expensive. It takes time, evidence, patience, and a willingness to see things through even when it gets ugly. A lot of people, including those 3 previous property owners, made the rational choice to walk away rather than fight. And I don't judge them for that. Sometimes walking away is the right choice. But sometimes, someone has to stand and fight, not for revenge, but for justice. Not to hurt someone, but to protect everyone who comes after you. The Pinecrest Lodge is thriving now. Guests love it. The community is healthier. And somewhere, in a minimum security prison, Linda is hopefully learning that houses aren't homes, and control isn't the same as connection. Me? I'm already scouting my next historic property to renovate, though this time I'm checking the HOA president's background before I bid. Drop a comment with what you think of this story. Have you dealt with an HOA nightmare? Share your stories below. And remember, always read the bylaws. But more importantly, always stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Thanks for watching, or reading, or however you consume this absolute saga of mountain real estate drama and petty HOA tyranny. Until next time, protect your boundaries, know your rights, and never, ever let someone squat in your lodge.